Let's talk about what cheese has to do with Russian sanctions. Navalny, a longtime enemy of Putin, mysteriously died in a Russian prison. It wasn't really that mysterious because there have been attempts to poison him before, but since then, he's been made out to be a hero. The Biden administration is using this death as a catalyst to announce major sanctions on Russia. The United States media also responded, typical stuff like only a ruthless dictator with no morals or civility would murder their political opposition, which reminds me of a Yahoo News investigation in which 30 former U.S. intelligence officials, 8 of whom shared details of the CIA's plans, revealed that under Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump, the CIA discussed assassinating Julian Assange, and they even went so far as making sketches or options for how to do it. We also have covert operations to thank for the murder of Patrice Lumumba, democratically elected leader of the Congo, Anwar al-Awlaki, who was a U.S. citizen, Rafael Trujillo, who was the president of the Dominican Republic, and the list goes on. These are just ones we know about, by the way. So if killing your political opposition within your own country is bad, killing the democratically elected leaders of other countries, where does that fall? Is that bad too? Is it maybe worse morally to kill your political opposition if they're a leader of another country, or if they're just a person within your country, a member of the press, or an organizer?
Make no mistake, Putin is responsible for Alexei's death. I'm announcing more than 500 new sanctions.
We need to stop pretending the US is exceptionally a great and just country. Political leaders are not the only ones killed by the US government. Since 1973, 196 people had been wrongfully convicted and then sentenced to death in the US. They've been exonerated based on evidence they were innocent. But those were accidents. Plus, when the United States kills their political opponents, that's different because the US always has really good reasons for killing those guys. So was Navalny a good dude, as the US would like us to remember him? Navalny was one of 3 co-founders of the National Russian Liberation Movement, which is a far-right Russian nationalist political movement that existed till 2011. Navalny's statements and participation in racist marches filled with swastikas and other Nazi symbols are well known in other parts of the world. He was a key leader and organizer of the annual anti-Muslim, anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, quote, Russian March in Moscow. The themes of this march might sound familiar. Russia for Russians, take back Russia, and stop feeding the Caucasus. The last one is a demand to end federal subsidies to the poorer, less developed, largely Muslim regions of Russia. There is still today a video on YouTube showing Navalny calling Central Asian and Muslim people with rotten teeth to be extracted, and also, and this is worse, cockroaches that must be exterminated. And he says this while he's firing a gun. It's a very weird video. But the New York Times this week wrote, Mr. Navalny, in death, draws comparisons to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I don't think they can be compared. They both did marches, but it was a very different kind of marching. I don't think Martin Luther King Jr. would have liked this dude. In August of 2023, Navalny was sentenced to 19 years on charges including publicly inciting extremist activity, funding extremist activity, and, quote, rehabilitating Nazi ideology. He was not a popular political figure in Russia either. The Levada Center conducted a survey released on April 6, 2017, which showed Navalny's recognition among the Russian population at 55%. Out of those who knew who he was, only 4% definitely would vote for him. 14% would probably vote for him in a presidential election where he was running, and only 55% of people knew who he was. In September of 2020, only 20% of Russians approved of Navalny's activities, 50% disapproved, and 18% had never heard of him. So I guess our dollars went to waste. What? Yes, our dollars to fund Navalny's activities. It turns out that in 2016, The U.S. official governmental agency, the National Endowment for Democracy, gave 108 grants totaling $6.8 million to organizations across Russia. Why was this? For, quote, engaging activists and fostering civic engagement. The endowment no longer names Russian recipients who, under Russian laws, are cracking down on foreign funding. They can face harassment or arrest because of these laws. But our boy Navalny was named before that rule came into place. So wait a minute. It sounds like Russia's not the only one meddling in elections abroad.
Russia's interference.
Russia's determination to interfere in our election.
This is not about politics. This is about national security. It is about a foreign country, a foreign adversary seeking to manipulate the politics and democracy of the United States of America.
That's crazy. The National Endowment for Democracy, by the way, had a direct role in funding opposition forces and paramilitary forces leading up to the 2004 coup against the democratically elected president of Haiti, Jean-Bertrand Artiste. It sounds like they have a very CIA understanding of what democracy means.
Russian, not just efforts to interfere in 2016, but ongoing efforts to interfere in American society. And it's not limited to the territory of the United States. These are efforts they undertake in many other parts of the world.
Maybe if killing your own citizens is bad when Russia does it, it's bad when the US does it too. Maybe if the Russia meddling in our elections is bad, we shouldn't meddle in theirs. Even if people have reason to believe these guys being killed are bad dudes. And I do think killing Nazis is less bad than killing innocent people. I think that's fair to say that Martin Luther King Jr.'s murder, a man who is fighting for the equality of all human beings, was maybe more wrong than the murder of a guy who thought Muslims were cockroaches, but that's just me.
Им стоит бояться! Им стоит бояться! Да!
Regardless of how you feel about any of that, doesn't really matter. What's important is, will sanctions produce an outcome that's good for the United States? And it seems like we've learned nothing. It seems like we don't even like to ask that question. When the United States immediately sanctioned Russia following the invasion of Ukraine.
I'm going to begin to impose sanctions in response far beyond the steps we and our allies and partners implemented in 2014.
The ruble dropped 40% in value. It went from 120 to the dollar on February 27th to 72 to the dollar on March 9th. The media reported on this like crazy, that our sanctions were powerful and were putting Russia in check.
These consequences are having a significant impact on the economy in Russia. We know it is having the impact that the world intended.
But what happened next didn't get as much press. Putin demanded that unfriendly countries to Russia pay for Russian gas in rubles, the Russian currency, instead of dollars, euros, or another currency. European countries get a lot of their gas from Russia, around 40%. In 2022, gas imports from Russia to Europe ranged from 200 million to 800 million euros a day. This was Putin's response to the economic sanctions by the US. And following Putin's announcement about the ruble, it went back up to 100 on the dollar within 1 week.
The Russian ruble has almost returned to its pre-war levels. So does the administration believe that the sanctions are still working?
Absolutely, yes.
So what happened as a result? Well, now Europe pays for Russian gas in rubles. Within 1 month, Europeans complied to the payment terms of Russia through Gazprom, which is a Russian state-owned energy giant, and Gazprom Bank. Under this new system, gas payments are still today invoiced and sent in euros, just to save face, they write euros on the invoice, and then that money's taken from a European energy company's euro account, converted to rubles, and then that money is transferred into a ruble account also belonging to the energy company. Then it's taken by Gazprom. This strengthens the Russian currency and gives them more buying power abroad.
Perversely enough, the fact that the ruble has strengthened is somewhat a consequence of the way that sanctions have been imposed.
I'm not talking about cheese as in money. I'm talking about cheese. One of my friends, Stephen Kinzer, said this in 2019. Several Russians I met during my visit last month advised me to notice the cheese. A waitress explained Russian cheese was always terrible. All good cheese was imported. Now, because of the sanctions, we can't import cheese anymore. So we started making our own. And after a few years, look what great cheese we have. Sanctions made us more self-reliant. Now, Putin turned around the impact of economic sanctions within 1 week. What outcome are we really producing by sanctioning Russia again in response to Navalny's death?
This aggression cannot go unanswered. It's going to take time, and we have to show resolve so he knows what's coming, and so the people of Russia know what he's brought on them.
We could, instead, mind our own goddamn business instead of trying to punish the population of Russia by messing up their economy over our beef with Putin.
We in the United States are going to continue to ensure that Putin pays the price for his aggression abroad and repression at home.
We could try diplomacy, talk about things like adults. We have a global economy. Some countries produce a ton of gas that other countries import, while other countries produce wheat or fruit or sugar. Sanctions hurt the population, but the leaders of a country are usually the richest people there. They're hardly affected by the sanctions. And there's an example of this that's pretty extreme. The United States hurting themselves more than another country. The Cuban biotech industry, for example, is huge. They boast cutting-edge medical advancements to reinvent traditional cancer and diabetes treatments. I have family members who have died of lung cancer, which Cuba has successful treatments for. The US tops the global list for the prevalence of cancer and diabetes, but our Cold War era blockade that has been maintained for 60 years by the US government prevents the medical research and vaccines developed in Cuba from reaching the rest of the world. So Russian cheese sounds pretty good right about now.